I was 12 when my family moved to the middle of nowhere. Some rural patch of land in Oregon surrounded by nothing but thick pine trees and silence. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The kind of place where the nights are too dark, too quiet, and the wind always sounds like footsteps if you're awake long enough. The house was old, built in the 1940s. It had all the classic horror movie features: creaky floors, an attic no one wanted to go into, and a rundown shed out back that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. That shed sat about 30 feet from the back door, barely standing, with rusted hinges and a sagging roof. It was filled with junk: tools, broken furniture, random boxes that belonged to the previous owner. My dad kept saying he'd clean it out one day, but like a lot of things, he never did. We just left it alone. That first week was uneventful. The place was quiet, and we tried to convince ourselves that quiet meant safe. But I remember the first time something felt wrong. It was late, probably close to midnight. I was still up, hiding under my blanket with a flashlight, reading comics I wasn't supposed to be reading. That's when I heard Max, our golden retriever, barking like crazy. Max was the kind of dog that would wag his tail at a stranger. But this bark, it wasn't friendly. It was sharp, panicked, like something was there. I crept to my window and peeked outside. He was facing the shed, standing firm in the dark, barking into the emptiness like he saw something I couldn't. The motion sensor light by the back door had clicked on, casting these weird stretched out shadows across the lawn. But the shed itself stayed dark. I stared for a while. No movement, no noise. Eventually, Max calmed down. I went back to bed, telling myself it was probably a raccoon or something. But deep down, even then, I knew that wasn't it. That wasn't normal. The barking didn't stop after that first night. In fact, it started happening more often. Max would go crazy in the middle of the night, always facing the shed. He'd snarl, growl, bark like there was something or someone out there. Every time we checked, the yard looked empty, silent. But Max never barked without a reason. One morning after a particularly loud night, my dad and I went outside to investigate. That's when we saw them. Footprints. Heavy, deep boot prints in the dirt between our back door and the shed. They were fresh, clear, leading toward the shed, but none leading away. That was the part that stuck with me. They just stopped at the shed, as if whoever left them either vanished or went inside. But that didn't make sense. The shed was locked. My dad had put a rusty old padlock on it the day we moved in. It didn't look broken or tampered with. Still, the prints were real. They were there. We couldn't explain them. I asked my dad what he thought. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably a neighbor cutting through our land or maybe a hunter passing by. But that made no sense. We didn't have neighbors close enough to cut through, and no hunter I'd ever heard of walked onto someone's property at night and left no exit trail. After that, I started watching the shed more often. I'd stare at it from my bedroom window at night, and every time Max barked, I felt that same cold pull in my stomach. Something wasn't right, but I had no idea just how wrong it would get. It was sometime around 2 a.m. when I heard it. Not barking this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunches on the gravel path just outside my bedroom window. I held my breath, frozen under the covers, unsure if I was dreaming. But then the sound came again. And this time, it was closer. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and tiptoed to the window, pulling the blinds down just enough to see the yard. That's when the motion sensor light flicked on. And there he was. A man, tall and thin, standing completely still beside the shed. His face was buried in shadow, but I could make out the outline of a long, dirty gray coat. He didn't move. He just stood there, like he was listening or waiting for something. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just backed away from the window like my body knew instinctively not to make a sound. Then I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. My dad grabbed his rifle without saying a word and stormed outside. By the time he got to the shed, the man was gone, vanished into the trees. But the footprints were there, fresh, clear, deep, leading straight up to the shed. This time, my dad unlocked the door and checked inside. I stood behind him, heart pounding. But all we found was what we'd always seen. Old junk, rusted tools, rotting wood. Nothing else. Still, that night marked a turning point. My dad added a new padlock to the shed and reinforced the doors with a steel bar. We all hoped that would be enough. For a while, it was quiet again, but that silence wouldn't last. Then Max disappeared. One morning, he just wasn't there. His leash was still hanging on the hook. The back door was shut. No signs of him digging out or running off. We searched the woods, the roads, even knocked on a few distant neighbors' doors. Nothing. Max was gone. I was heartbroken. I kept trying to believe he'd wandered too far and got lost, and that maybe, somehow, he'd find his way back. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept drifting back to the shed, to the man I'd seen, to the footprints that led nowhere. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood go cold. The back door creaked open. I slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway. My dad was already up, standing near the door with his rifle in hand. Neither of us said anything. We just moved slowly toward the kitchen window. And that's when the motion light flicked on. The man was back, standing beside the shed. But this time, he wasn't empty-handed. In one hand, he held a large knife. In the other was Max's collar. I swear for a second the world just stopped. Everything in me dropped. My stomach, my breath, my sense of safety. It felt like the air got sucked out of the house. My dad flung the door open and shouted, raising the rifle. But the man turned and bolted, fast into the woods, gone before my dad could even take a shot. We called the police immediately. They searched the area, combed through the forest, brought flashlights and dogs, but found nothing. No sign of the man. But what they did find was inside the shed. And it was worse than anything we could have imagined. When the police opened the shed, they expected dust and junk. What they found was something else entirely. The floor had been cleared, swept clean, like someone had been spending time in there, living in it. In the dirt, someone had carved strange symbols, crude, messy shapes. Some looked like eyes, some like stick figures with slashed out faces. Disturbing, almost childlike, but filled with rage. In the corner was a pile of bones. The officers said they were probably animal bones, but no one could say for sure. I didn't want to ask. I just stood there shaking, trying not to cry. Then they found the panel. It was hidden behind a loose wooden board at the back of the shed. Inside was a backpack. And that's when the horror really sank in. The bag was filled with items that didn't belong to us. Wallets, watches, scraps of worn clothing. Some of them were clearly old, stained, torn. These weren't just forgotten objects. They were keepsakes, trophies. Whoever had been watching us had done this before. The final thing they found was a notebook. Dozens of pages, filled with strange writing. Some of it just rambling nonsense. Some of it more symbols, and some drawings. Drawings of houses, families, stick figures with X's for eyes, faces, eyes, always eyes. It was like the man had been documenting us, watching us like we were part of some twisted game. The police took everything and left tape around the shed. That night, while we were packing, I looked out the window one last time, and I swear, just beyond the tree line, maybe 10 feet from the shed, I saw a face. It was gone the second I blinked. I screamed, yelling for my dad. He grabbed the rifle and stormed outside, yelling into the woods, firing a few warning shots. But whoever, or whatever it was, disappeared again. We left 2 days later, moved to a town closer to people. Somewhere with street lights, sidewalks, and locked doors. Somewhere normal. But I still dream about the shed. And sometimes I wonder how long he had been there before we ever noticed.